Thank you for joining us for this webinar, Compliance in the Fast Lane. So we have Bo Butod here, the co-founder of Render Compliance. Thank you for joining us, Bo, to share with us. Um, and I'm Nick Moy, the Chief Security Officer at Scrut Automation. Looking forward to, running through, I think, and getting, a lot of good insights from Bo, who has been in the auditing business for quite some time. And really looking forward myself to learning from that. I've never been an auditor. I think it's outside of my skill set. That's all going to be you, Bo. And but
That's a nice way to put it.
it's a nice way to put it. That was the nicest auditor joke I could make. Yeah, I mean, and then I think having gone through many audits on the receiving end, I'm looking forward to sharing and, seeing kind of what comes out. We'll stick to the script as much as we're supposed to, but, and we'll also look forward to sharing, kind of what comes out from the conversation. But we'll go ahead and get started here. So let's kick things off. Shikar, if we could get to the next slide, please.
I was gonna say, maybe if nothing else, the message will be auditors are people too, you know?
We could change
We
the title.
we have faces.
Thanks. Yeah, that's probably fair. I see, but I forget, so I think that's why it's important you're here, Bo, to remind us of that. Yeah, I mean, so to get things started, I think for me, myself, and a lot of folks I've worked with in different organizations, and I think a lot of folks on the call will feel this is like audits or something we're told, or by auditors or people managing the project. They're like, hey, this is a big annual exercise, and unfortunately, it even rhymes. It's like, okay, we're gonna have this big thing we have to get ready for. It's like we're getting ready. They're gonna come and they're gonna check everything, and we're just gonna hope it's all gonna work out. Um, is that how we should be doing it, Bo? Is that right? Like, do we stick to that? I mean, it must be working for someone if that's why people are doing it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you're really setting me up for a slam dunk there. But yeah, I think anything you can do like outside of that once a year annual audit period to monitor how you're doing is going to go a long ways to achieving success when that audit comes, right? Yeah, it's just too much time. 12 months for most audit periods, right? Is just too much time that elapses between that audit and to allow things to degrade. What's the law of entropy, that everything tends towards disorder, right? And that's true of SOC 2 controls, ISO 271 controls. What that's true of compliance and security in general, right? So if nothing else, if you can just like check in every quarter, every 6 months on what's our control framework, are these things being done? That's a huge win. Maybe you'll catch two things that would have been big gaps or would have been really painful to implement right during the audit time. And then the side benefit, I could talk all day about this, but then the side benefit being your the rest of your team gets bought into the process now, right? Because they're more aware of, oh yeah, we have this thing going on that we have to keep in mind. So they're going to be more bought in during the audit time as well.
Totally. No, yeah, and I think it's. I wonder if it's just maybe no one wants to be responsible for this outside of the audit, but then it's kind of like if you let it kind of what's the word, neglect it, neglect the controls, updating who's responsible, I mean, and then it's going to be a rude awakening when the audit starts, and I forgot to mention too at the beginning, it's like we're not just talking about SOC 2 audits. I mean, I think just kind of audits in general that are going to be, you might be going through ISO 27001 certification audits. You
Mm,
might have surveillance audits for that, PCI, annual PCI. If you're a big enough organization, you have to get a third party qualified security assessor to come in and go through that process.
mhm.
And I think instead, you can look at all those frameworks and how to kind of figure out those. There's also, we wanted to have this webinar to spend some time talking about this, maybe the softer stuff that's not framework specific, but just kind of managing the compliance and audit process. And how do we, what are things we can do, and, making sure it's a part of the goals and OKRs for the year that teams are actually having some capacity for that, especially if it's important for your business. Um, okay, let's go to the
Yeah,
next slide.
like maybe you've been through this process once before, it was rough last year, and you want to find out how to make it better next year, right? That's a lot of what we're here for.
Yeah, and so there's going to be all the you can try to plan for everything, and then there are things you're not going to be able to plan for. Basically, like something else is going to always come up. But I think, Bo, what do you think about how what are ways people can kind of deal with that, since they're going to have times where maybe a customer says like, hey, our renewal's coming up, and there was a compliance certification that you said you were going to have, and you don't
Mm,
have it yet, or the last time you got it was too long ago, and they're trying to
mhm.
turn it into a big thing. Um,
Yeah,
and other examples of that, how do like what are some of the things people can do about that, because they're kind of maybe a little bit surprised, or now they have to kind of be completely reactive to that.
hmm, yeah, totally. Um, I mean, what I know best is SOC 2, so maybe I'll start there for an example. Like, I think that comes up often with um, SOC 2, where people that are implementing SOC 2 or companies go through the process, they implement the type 1 exam first, right? Which is just that point in time report. And then they kind of forget that the type 2 that is going to be over a period of time. And so, yeah, and some companies, like maybe you're getting a type 1 year after year, and you decide to kind of upgrade to a type 2. Maybe you're getting asked for that by your customers or required, or you just think it's a good idea because it's a more valuable report. But yeah, you kind of forget like, oh, I can't decide that right before audit time. I have to actually um, decide that before the exam period starts. Um, and so usually with a lot of companies, that's you start your exam period immediately after the type 1 date. Uh, so if your last SOC 2 report was April 30th, then maybe you start your type 2 period on May 1st. But what that means is you have to have all those controls in place as of May 1st, because that's what the auditor is going to be testing, right? Um, and that applies to other frameworks too, where you're auditing something over a period of time. You have to kind of do like a gap assessment or a readiness assessment before that period starts to ensure that um, you're going to be compliant. So what you can do practically for that, I think, uh, well, yeah, obviously plan for it, think proactively for it, put a project timeline into place, but just like being good, be in constant communication with your auditor about your goals, because a lot of times they'll have ideas on how that's going to affect. Maybe they want to do a gap assessment, to make sure you're on the right track, or yeah, just like check in with them, and they should be able to help advise you on those sorts of things.
Totally, right. I think auditors are people and can be helpful too. Okay, so that's
Sure.
great reminder. Yeah, I was also when you were mentioning that, I was thinking how helpful it is, even though it's not a fun topic to talk about audits, to be, I think, in really close communication. If you're the security team, if you're the compliance team, if you're the engineering team, and you're responsible for managing this process for your company, kind of whatever team you're on, I think it's super important to be in, I think, close communication with the either, like, say, the customer success team or the sales team, or
Mm.
whoever is responsible for like renewals, or going into like new markets, so that that's not a surprise when it comes up, that like, hey, for your biggest customers, that they have these compliance requirements, you should be, I think, in close contact with those folks, because they're so busy doing their jobs, they'll probably come tell you the day before or the week before it's needed, and be like,
Yep.
hey, this customer says we need a SOC 2 Type 2 done yesterday. um, I think you're gonna have to like go, I think, proactively working with those people, and getting kind of what things might be coming down the pipeline that can affect your company's compliance requirements. Then
Right.
is
Like I was
another
gonna
way to
say,
kind of help yourself.
like for example, if you're considering, if you've just done commercial, but maybe you're considering expanding your product into like defense clients, then that's a whole realm of compliance requirements that immediately you have to comply with, right? Like I don't know if you have personal
Yeah,
experience with
totally.
implementing like FedRAMP or something, but that's like that's a huge lift to get into that, right? So yeah, as soon as
Yes.
sales or whoever is thinking about it, you should definitely loop in the security compliance folks as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because basically, I think it's like compliance is not just a compliance. It's not just a GRC problem, a governance risk compliance problem, but it's totally like, uh, just a part of the business. It's kind of like anything else, where you're going
Hmm.
to expand new markets, you'd want to figure out like taxes, entity, legal structures. But for compliance and security, you'd want to figure out what new requirements there are. Yeah, and if you're going to sell to like the federal government, you're going to sell to defense contractors for the federal government. FedRAMP is going to be a thing. State governments are adopting some kind of state ramp thing right now as
Hmm.
well, and
Texas ramp.
that's just normal. Yeah, yeah, that's going to
If
be
you
fun. Those are fun days.
if you're going for big healthcare clients, then maybe high trust is going to be a thing, right? Which is a
Yeah,
whole other category. So yeah, definitely just communicate, right?
let's yeah. No, I mean, I've personally lived through those surprises. Yeah, I could say it's always really fun when like a VP of sales is like, "Hey, um, yeah, so there's a this great customer, and they just had one small question about, oh, when our SOC 2 Type 2 that we promised them is going to be done." And
Mm,
it was like, wow, it would have been great information when we were planning for the year. And like, why didn't anyone talk about that? It was a different company,
mm,
past
mm,
job. Um, and it was like, yeah, no one said it was, they said we were doing it, just because like it would be a good thing to do. No one said there was like a hard deadline. It was like, well, it kind of is because we promised them. And so, anyways, thanks, Nick, for figuring that out. Like,
yeah, yeah. Can you wave
great,
your wand, your security wand?
sure, why not? let's go to the next slide, please. So I mean, and this is, I, I guess this makes a lot of sense. Like defining the goals, for compliance needs. It's a lot of times, I think we just run straight into it, mostly like in that past example I mentioned. It's like a fire. Someone's like, we have to have this, go get it, or we need to do this. You're going to slow us down if we don't have this. Um, and it's like very alarming and disturbing. And then
Mm.
I think you just need to clarify though. It's kind of like whether it's with the other leaders in the company or with your leader, your kind of your leadership, whether you're working for the CEO, the CTO, or somebody else. It's like, hey, what do we really need this for? What are we trying to achieve? Are we just, is this about our company's like maturity? Is this about our company's like customers and ensuring they trust us and we have a way to share that? Is it just a regulatory requirement because we process payments and so and credit cards? I think that's how I kind of think about this and just keep it narrow. I think start narrow and like explicitly like what is the goal and with the different stakeholders that you're working with. Um,
Mm.
what do you what are you thinking about from
I
auditor
think
land?
those have those have been some of the most painful conversations I've been a part of when you've been doing an audit for a customer for a couple of years and then you realize like, oh, they didn't actually really need this audit. Like, maybe the their customer mentioned it was a good idea, but didn't really care that much about it. So yeah, if you can like push really hard to
Right.
have the uncomfortable scope conversations up front, um, yeah, that's huge. But but yeah, a lot of people just, they get the initial, maybe it's on a questionnaire from a client about do you have this framework? And then somehow that gets translated to we must implement this. But like you said, stepping back, what are we trying to achieve? What kind of data are we processing? So what clients are we going to be working with? And then what out of that, letting that the actual business need drive what certifications or compliance reports really make sense for us to implement. Yeah,
That
I'm
must
sure you,
be so uncomfortable.
yeah,
Just
not
be like,
not a fun.
so, it's great. We've been doing this audit for a while now. We've actually done it a couple times, and oh, it turns out there was no real goal for this, or we're not sure
Uh,
why we've been doing it. And you're not sure why you're doing it because someone unkindly just put this requirement on you.
mhm.
Well, that is, yes, it does not pay it doesn't pay folks. So make sure you're like, I think just, it is. I think it's important. I think there's no reason. I don't, as a security practitioner, I don't think anyone should just like waste resources to have audits for audits sake. They can do internal audits if they want to go validate controls and test effectiveness. They can do maturity and gap assessments if they're trying to improve their program. I think audits are an important part of like communicating trust for your customers, especially in B2B businesses, but even in B2C businesses too. And then there's like regulatory needs, but if you're just doing it because someone random said so, someone in the company saw something and doesn't have a clear understanding for what the need is, my biggest fear when that happens, and what I would hope all of you can avoid, is that is what becomes scope creep. That is what becomes like disappointment. It just leads to disappointment because
Yep.
nobody knows really why you're doing it. It was just kind of inertia. Like, hey, we've been doing this and we're doing it. And then it was kind of like, is this helping our business? Is this helping our market expansion plans? Is it helping our customer base? Because if it's not, you're just I don't want to say you're ruining lives. You're just irritating people, kind of at worst.
Yeah,
Asking
yeah,
people for evidence and collecting it, and kind of, unnecessarily. So you're not going to make
wasting.
friends. It's
There
a
you go.
weird way to make
Y-
friends.
If you want to be more popular, then ask the hard questions up front, right? But
Yeah,
I was gonna
yeah.
say, yeah, just briefly, like I think it makes sense why people get into those spots though, because like you're in the, let's say you're a customer success or you're a salesperson, right? And you're in the sales flow and you got a big client on the line and you really want this client. Um, you're not, you don't necessarily want to be really pushy, right? Um, and so that's where a lot of those questions get unasked that really should be asked. But yeah, if you have a more big picture view of it, then you can say, like, we want to make sure we really get you what you need. Here's what we do. Does this make sense with what you're asking for here? Um, but yeah, yeah. And then internally.
Oh, no, totally. And before I forget, if you work with an auditor who doesn't ask you what your goals are and why you
Mm,
need this audit,
red flag.
that's pretty big red flag. Just like red flag
Mm,
emojis everywhere. And then I think, for everyone's sake, for your own sake, and your stakeholders and everyone, I think documenting. I was just thinking, like, oh yeah, documenting that in, whether you're using a GRC platform or your kind of project plan and your kind of plan for the year, your annual plan, just making sure it's clear. It's like, hey, this year, we're going to be pursuing these certifications and these audits. And I mean, it sounds crazy, but a lot of people will go through a whole thing, like Bo said, and it's just like, oh yeah, we are just doing that because we did it last year, or someone who's no longer with the company said we should do it. So, uh,
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
kind of not
And
fun to be on the awkward moment when it's like, oh, why are we doing this? Toot,
right.
toot, toot.
And then to take that into the next level, like we were talking about on a framework level, which ones or what scope do we implement? But the second bullet point up top there, define risk statements in an actionable form. That's a great point too. Just like when you're setting down to figure out what your control framework is, letting your actual risk statements drive that, right? Like letting the business need for what's valuable and how should we protect that drive what your control should be, as opposed to starting the other way around, right? Like, oh yeah, we got to do high trust, we got these templates from the auditor. Um, so we got to implement all this. Like, that's the wrong way.
Basically, goals are your friend. Goals are your friends because you can reduce your scope. Have some
Mhm,
goals, make sure you know what risk your company is actually worried about with those risk statements. I mean,
mhm.
sounds crazy. I don't know. People will say, "Oh, this is super simple and stupidly obvious," but so few companies I've seen, big Fortune 500 companies, smaller companies, everything in between, actually document like well the risks they're actually worried about as a company, as a business, as a department. And so they have no real kind of justification to reduce the scope of something in a meaningful way. And then it just becomes kind of a they said this and everyone talking past each other. But, writing those down, reviewing them on a somewhat regular basis, aside from the audits. I was just talking to a friend who was an internal auditor for a long time and a GRC leader at a different company. And she was saying, she's like, yeah, people just don't actually do risk assessments ever as much as they need to be doing. And then an audit happens and then they try to show that they are. Um,
Do the paper
in,
exercise.
yeah, which is funny because then it was like, if you were doing that, it would help you manage your scope and it would help you reduce probably reduce. I think in more times than not reduce the amount of time you're auditing things you don't need to do, managing controls you don't need to manage. But yeah,
I'm
to
sure
each
we could
their
do
own.
a whole session on risk assessment too,
I
but
know.
it's
It's,
hard. Like
I,
when you're doing this for the first time, you're searching like risk assessment template. There's so much out there. It's
oh
hard to
yeah.
know what's
It's like when
right for
people
your
open
company.
the closet door that is full of stuff and it just falls on you. That's like putting in the search
Why
online
did
for
I
risk assessments. It's just like,
why did I do this? Yeah.
why did I do this? This is not, yeah. Then people change jobs right after that. Let's go to the next slide, please. One size fits all is a myth, but it must be real because it's a myth everyone seems to believe. No, I mean, when I think, yeah. What do you think about this, Bo? Like, what do we do about this one size fits all sort of myth? You know, what have you seen
Mhm.
work, or maybe and things maybe to look out for that don't work?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I think the most practical experience I have with this is regarding templates. Like, I think templates are great. They can make things. Um, they give you a framework, right? Something to start with when you don't know what to start with, or they just make things more consistent. Um, but yeah, just seen so many times that when you're implementing this for the first time, you assume too much about the templates, right? Um, so yeah, I guess that's the takeaway is like, if you're going to use templates, be it for control statements or risk assessment or for like policy documents, um, then do your homework on, is this a good template? Is someone that you trust recommending it to you, or have you done your own research on it? And then B, take the template and make it your own. Like, um, yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe you get a template control saying that you do background checks, including reference checks. Do you actually do reference checks, or do you do background checks on all employees? That sort of thing. Just go through the list um, and make sure that it fits what you're actually doing. Yeah, you got anything to add there from your
I mean,
experience?
boy, templates. I've seen so many one size fits all templates that just blow my mind. Why, like, you're just like, it's really unfortunate where a small company will get a template of a, say, information security policy, um, and it does not help them go faster because that template is like 20 pages, not 20, but maybe it's actually like 10 pages, 5 pages long. It's super long. It was written as if it were for like a 200-year-old bank or something. And it's more work to go through that template and fix it and make it fit your company. And I would say if you want to go faster, go look at some examples. The internet is your friend. And then just kind of right size that. You're like, okay, for us, because you just ask yourself, like, are you a remote company? Are you in person? Do you have like what do you call it? Do you have like people in different countries? Do you have people all in the same country? And what kind of business are you in? Build your security policies based on that. Like, are you a B2C company? You collect customer data, you're a B2B company, and you're collecting like company data from your customers. But
Mm-hmm.
those one size fits all templates I've seen just they take more work and more time because I've never met anyone who's like, oh, I can't wait to go through this random template and clean up and fix it and make it work. what's more likely to happen is the person you delegate that to, or if it's yourself, you're gonna end up on like Chat GPT and you're just gonna be like, rewrite this template for a 50-person
Mhm.
company. Who knows what that's gonna say, but I'm sure it'll be great. I
Might
mean,
be a better
maybe,
start. Yeah.
maybe it could be a better start. No, and I think it's like just going back to the previous point. I'm like, if you want to right size that, you're just gonna have to be clear on your goals.
Hmm.
And I think, those goals are gonna help you scope out like what matters. And, I think to the point on the slide, we're like mapping business objectives with the scope. It's like, yeah, like policies aren't written for arbitrarily, they're written for your company. And
Yeah.
I like to believe auditors understand that. If you have an auditor who says like the policies or things that you've written for your company, they don't like that you've tailored it for your company, that's also a red flag. If you meet an auditor who says everything needs to fit like some one size fits all thing, that's a red flag. So
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, just hearing you speak has gotten me uh thinking about policy. Like it's funny how we use policies from an audit perspective. I think as a whole in the industry, it's funny and kind of sad, right? Because policies are supposed to be what drive the things that happen at your company, right? Um, but what we end up using policies as like, oh yeah, we have this control that says we do this, and the auditor's asking for our policy evidence for this. Do we have this? No, so we go and write it up. Or like you said, we get this policy that covers 100 different things that are only tangentially applicable to our company. So you end up using policies as a secondary evidence, right? Of we do this, but nobody actually uses them to drive company culture and action. But yeah, what if, like you said, you started with the things that were actually important to you, your company, and you let that form your policy, and you let that shape your controls. Um, you probably have shorter policies for one thing, which would be nice, and then they'd be a lot better too. Yeah, it's like with the template, it's really tempting to just keep everything in there because you're reading through it. You're like, oh yeah, and this part of network security, that's kind of applicable. Like, yeah, let me keep that in there. Um, but then, yeah, you just end up with these huge, bulky things that are impossible to keep updated. And you have all
yeah,
these things, but is it really important? Probably not.
well, and then it's like you're gonna get audited against those policies in a lot of different frameworks and standards. I guess a lot of different audit certifications will go back and say some version of you have this in your policy. Are you doing this? And it was
That's
like you're gonna really
always a
regret not
fun.
taking it out. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And it was like, oh, you said that you do this every month. Do you review all your firewall connections every month? Do you review
Right.
your firewall logs? Who reviews them? Were you maintaining that evidence? You know, I mean, and I think it's funny. It's like helping people get organized is like such a big part of this, but then there are a lot of these traps where it's like people are given these templates and it's like, oh, these templates will solve all your problems. Just, you know, kind of, yeah, good luck. But yeah,
Yeah.
clear goals and clear scope and clear objectives. And I think, and then keeping track of that is the other thing too. It's like this sort of mundane problem of just keeping track of changing goals for your company, and where
Mm,
the company's going. You should be changing the kind of goal and scope of your kind of compliance and audit,
mhm.
and how you're managing that and what kind of audits you should be invested in. It should not be. I mean, I wish it was right, but I guess it's why you have a job. It's not set it and forget it. You cannot just be like, we're gonna do this, and then it's gonna be like this forever. I mean,
So,
if
so how
you're
do you
a
do that?
200-year-old,
How do you do that practically? Is that through like, I don't know, quarterly risk assessment update, or
Yeah,
how do you?
yeah. I mean,
How do you
that's what I suggest. I suggest, I don't know who's ever taken up my suggestion on this, but it is just like getting a quarterly check-in with the right stakeholders. So like at one company I've been at, that would be getting the CEO, and the COO and the head of finance together on a quarterly call. And then I just walk through like, hey, here were the risks that we kind of talked about at the beginning of the year. Here's like how they've changed over the last quarter. Here are the kind of projects that we've invested in to like manage either like kind of the likelihood or the impact of these risks. Um,
Mm,
and then, then use that as a discussion like, hey, is there anything changing in our business strategy that we need to adjust kind of the scope of these things? Or are we gonna like keep them the same? Um, should I be making this go faster or should I be like
mm,
managing it at this pace?
mm,
Um, I think it's just really hard to do it in a vacuum and be successful. Like if you
uh,
don't communicate with the other folks who depend on it, even if they don't think it's interesting or they don't care, or they say they don't care, but they will at some point when it's a problem for them. You kind
mhm,
of have to do what you need to do to, I think, get that communication, whether it's asynchronous, offline, Slack,
yeah,
email. You record a Loom video and walk through a slide and send it to them so they can watch at their leisure. I don't know what you have to do, but I mean, do whatever it takes and get the feedback, get the input that you need so you can kind of, I think, be successful. And and this is where technology can help. I mean, you can document and collect, and you can actually get a lot of metrics that you don't have to manually go make a giant spreadsheet and build a beautiful PowerPoint that you can do today
mhm,
using technology that was not nearly as useful back in 2014.
mm,
Um, a lot of it was kind of sad looking. It was really like, let's build a SharePoint site and upload some documents to it. With much fancier versions of that in 2024, right? So
mhm.
yeah,
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 yeah.
no,
That's a great point. Like if you just want to use a spreadsheet for risk assessment or a spreadsheet for controls, that works just fine, right? But if you want to have something where you can dynamically track those evolving risks and then drill down into controls or evidences or different frameworks, um, that's when it becomes really important to have a tool, right? But yeah, I like the way you
100%.
talk about that too. It's like the risk assessment is not even the important thing here. Almost, it's really just a medium for communicating with leadership's goals and the security team's efforts and making sure those are connected.
I think it's easy to get disconnected, um, you know, and I don't blame people. I mean, sometimes it's hard to get a hold of your stakeholders, different parts of the business, marketing, sales, the CEO, other folks in the company. They have varying levels of interest in these topics from time to time. It depends on the culture of the company, depends on the individuals, their personality. Um, so it could be really hard. It could be one
Mhm,
of the hardest parts, but I think it is. These are the things that are like what could help, what could save you. I think try and deal with that the best way you can. Let's go to the next topic. Oh, okay. Hold on. Those it's when I have think my this step away for a second.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, so this, I guess, is about concepts of collaboration and accountability when it comes to compliance. So, yeah, I think we've Nick and I have got at this a little bit previously, but um, collaboration, of course, is huge. So yeah, maybe just like the low-hanging fruit when it comes to making your process better, I think starts with visibility of controls. Um, like, do you even know where your control framework lives? If not, go find it. You know, if you don't have it anywhere, request the latest version from your auditor, and then just keep that in a centralized spot somewhere, SharePoint, Google Drive. That's like a huge win right there. If you can just know what your controls are, where they live, that's huge. Um, but then beyond that, if you can make the people who need to be aware about them aware, that's also a huge win, right? Like take your spreadsheet of controls and assign a control owner to each one, communicate with them, make sure they know that they are accountable for this control. Um, Again, you get so much more buy-in that way when it comes to audit time, and hopefully they are tracking that throughout the year to make sure it's happening. And then maybe step 3, if you really want to leverage that collaboration and accountability to make sure it's working, implement some sort of quarterly validation, right? Or translate those control statements. Maybe they're in a spreadsheet or a GRC tool, translate those into actual tasks. Like maybe your engineering team uses Jira. So, um, have a recurring quarterly task to do this user access review and have that reference your control. Yeah, I think we more or less covered that one, but anything else to add there, Nick?
I mean, I think keeping track and wherever you can document it, like you said, you can use a GRC platform to do that. You can use Office 365, Google Workspace, wherever you kind of keep stuff to do that. Then I think that's going to really be your friend because the changing people, like the reorgs in your company, changing of who's responsible for what is just always such a I think like a pain in um, such a pain to
Mm-hmm.
keep it
Mm-hmm.
clean. Such a pain to deal with when you're going through an audit because then you're like you are getting asked for something you yourself are not personally responsible for. Finding the team or person who is responsible for that control. So when you are putting those together, when you're planning and kind of building out your GRC program and documenting your controls, like Bo said, if you can even get a version of that up and you can start looking at that, and even if you only update it 4 times a year, you're going to be better off than most people. A lot of time gets spent, I think, just a lot of time, I think, gets lost, maybe is probably the better way to put it, in just chasing down people and whose name goes where than it does on securing the company, testing your controls and validating it and the effectiveness and whatever. Because you just nobody knows. It's like, is that John or Mike? Like, is that the DevOps team or the site reliability team or is that the engineering team?
On that
You
note,
know,
how do you balance between, like, if you're the security compliance contact in your org, how do you balance between, like, okay, I've got this great GRC tool that's tracking all these things, but nobody in my company knows about it yet, right? Like, how do you bring those people into your beautiful world in a way that doesn't overwhelm them or put them off?
I think, and everyone has different thoughts on this, is I think you can actually work with them where they work best. So it's like if do they do most of their work in Jira,
Mm-hmm.
then I think you can you can, for a lot of, I think, platforms, you can connect with Jira to kind of push the task in there. And then set up in Jira the quarterly reminders, the weekly, the whatever's on there. And you can schedule that platform in Jira. And if they work, say you're working with like a lot of non-engineering, non-tech kind of business users in the company, and there's compliance things that you're waiting on finance or somebody or HR for. Um, and maybe they spend a lot of their time in Slack and they're comfortable with that, and you can connect with Slack and work, make sure like reminders and notifications go there. Because I think it's actually hard if you make all of those people come to your beautiful whatever you've organized. Um,
Right, right.
so
They're not
whatever
going to
you're
be in it.
using, I think it's kind of like, find a way. Fortunately, it's a lot of different ways to do that now. Um, but this just goes back to like, there's not a one size fits all. I mean,
Hmm.
Jira seems to be like I have a lot of I used to use Jira to be a one size fits all kind of like,
Hmm.
you try to smash Jira. Jira's the square you try to put through a triangle shaped hole where you just like
Yeah,
Jira for everything. I can
yeah.
customize it. I
Jira
look, I
database,
think
Jira
whatever
application.
works for people, right? I think people do
Yeah.
that with Google Workspace and Office 365. People will take a smart sheet and manage their whole audit out of smart sheet. So, you
Yeah.
know, I'm
Yeah.
I think as long as you're doing it and it works for you and your company, then that's great. Yeah, sorry I had to step away early. My toddler was getting angry. So,
No
let's
worries.
go to the next optimizing
So I have,
testing and evidence collection. Let's see. I think just checking something, making sure we have some Q&A time too. Um, yeah, and I guess if people have questions, send them in the Zoom chat thing, um, and we'll collect them. And even if we don't answer them live, we'll answer them offline. Uh, yeah. So yeah, I think this is kind of like where can automation help people?
mhm.
Where have you seen it be useful?
Yeah, this
And
is one of the specific areas where it seems like the technology is really important when it comes to the audit. Um, like because because compliance is so complicated, right? Let's just say you have a list of 60 controls. Well, each of those controls is going to have multiple evidences, artifacts that are associated with that, right? Um, and there ends up being so much back and forth if you're doing a real audit, to make basically, make the auditor happy that what you say is happening. So yeah, if you're just working with a spreadsheet and online folders, I think that very quickly can get confusing and out of hand. Whereas if you do have a dynamic um, evidence requests or a way to show your evidence on a dynamic platform, I think that makes a big difference.
yeah, no, I mean this is where I think, and I feel like we've covered this a bit where it's like this is useful for you know once you have like your goals and you have your scope and you're trying to like make things be more continuous and not just be point in time. This is going to be one of those ways to do that.
Mhm.
Let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, and you could maybe just one thing to add there too. I think if you already have a system, say our GRC platform that you're using, um, most of the time the auditor should be able to work with you on that. So I would say like push a little bit or make an effort to, if the auditor comes to you and like, you need to use our request platform, then I would push on that a little bit. if it's valuable to you to use your own platform, um, most of the time we should be able to hop onto there.
Auditors can learn. Auditors are human, they're people, they have faces, they can learn. I think
But yeah,
this is what I
yeah,
learned today.
there you go.
Yeah, yeah, no, totally. And I think it's like there's definitely a lot of red flags. Bo will probably have a red flags to look out for. Uh, I think post coming out soon here.
Video series, yep,
Yeah,
coming
video
to
series.
theaters near you.
Yeah, no. And I think on this slide, this is just going to be, this is just a summary of like I think a lot of the points that we covered in all the previous slides about like, hey, these are things you can kind of, if you really want to try to improve your program and see where you can like go faster and make it less painful. This is really just honestly, it captured like all of what we talked about, all these points. So I would just refer back here for that. And and really, I think this is just there's a lot of different things you can do. You don't have to feel like you have to do all of these things to try to make improvements, but I think you can start with any one of these to really, I think, make things get better, right? I mean, it's just going to be like an incremental process. So, and if you can do most of these things, you're probably going to have a well-running kind of more mature program.
Yeah,
Um,
and like something's better than nothing, right? Like you don't have to do a full-fledged built-out post-mortem that Microsoft would do on one of their incidents, like a post-mortem could just be I sit down for 5 minutes and think about how did the audit go and write down what I want to do different next year, like that in itself could
totally.
help a lot.
And just communicating it too, right? Not everything
Mm.
has to be a big, like, lengthy exercise. Um, that is, do we have any questions from folks? And we can answer those. And then, yeah. And then I think we can go to the next slide. Yep. Okay. So, yeah. I mean, I think this is, these are things, people probably want to look for if they are going to try to leverage technology to help them. But what you've seen a lot of different technology out there. What's your and what's your take on that? I know it's not one size fits all.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, like I don't know. Unfortunately, I have been mostly on the auditor side, right? So I don't have practical experience implementing a whole bunch of different GRC
I mean,
tools,
how about
but
as an
I think,
auditor though? Like, have
yeah,
you seen where maybe some clients were more successful with using technology and then some were less successful with using it?
yeah, definitely. Like, um, I mean, I think the advice here would just be like, would just follow any product implementation basics, like really do your due diligence at the beginning for what are the 20 to 40 different functions that we need this platform to provide. Like, do we need to track risks in here? What does that interface look like? Do we need that to map to controls, to map to evidences, assign control owners? Like just think through those logistical things that you really need it to do, list those all out, and then compare the different uh, tools against those things. Because yeah, we've definitely seen um, like I guess for me the biggest one is clients that will implement a tool and it doesn't have a way to communicate with the auditor. Um, or maybe it does, but it's like, you have to download a static zip file every time you want to see the new evidence. Um,
Yeah.
so like just thinking through kind of those basic things, like what do we need it to do?
No, totally. Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot of people, I guess they get if you don't know kind of like why you're doing the audit, what it's for, what goal you have, I don't think you'll be able to get, I think, a tool or platform that will help you because it can't
Mhm.
answer that question for you. Maybe that's kind of the moral of the story. I think like, hey, set your goals, figure out what works for your business, and then you can kind of define your audit scope. You can find a GRC platform that can help you with that. Otherwise, you know, if you don't know, nobody knows.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
if you can't share that with anyone about like what you're trying to manage for your company, what is the risk statement, what's the scope, and why you need these audits, then I think there's a lot of nice things out there, but they're just going to be
Mhm.
nice to have. I
Yep.
mean, we're at time, folks, so thank you for taking the time and hope, you were able to get some tips and tricks from Bo mostly. I was just here to kind of distract Bo and try to make this harder for him. And
Perfect.
thanks, Bo, for taking the time to share with the folks on the webinar. So, I think we got
Yep.
some
Thanks.
practical tips here. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Al.